This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. We're not going to avoid it. I'm going to be really honest with you. Maybe I should change the name of the podcast, but we're all going to go through the maze of life, and we're going to hit the wall occasionally. And some of us are just going to sit on the floor and just wait for something to happen. But my guest today, obviously, Kristof, you did not do that. You have found a way to get through many of the obstacles and challenges you've had in life. So introduce yourself to our audience and let's talk about your journey.
Shakespeare. Well, I'm Kristof Morrow. I'm a disabled Navy veteran. Uh, I have Tourette's. I'm an award-winning journalist and photographer. And I've won awards for a bunch of writing stuff, different writing stuff. And I've lived in the U.S. and Canada, and I just moved back to the U.S. actually. So I'm really happy to be here.
So you were born in the US and then you
hmm
moved to Canada and then back to the US. And as we
hmm
talked about right before we started, you were living in Canada where the weather is totally different from where you're living now. And sometimes that can be a huge challenge.
Shakespeare. I was born and raised in Texas, and I only lived in Canada for the last 7 years. But and so I've lived in like Louisiana and all the hot places. Man, it's
Um,
really, oh man, actually very very happy to be back. I love the South. For the weather. I adore it.
well, I will tell you, I was in
Mm.
Texas the second week of June when the temperatures were hovering at 100. And I didn't like it too much. It was way too much for
Oh
me.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. hmm It's
So,
different.
yeah.
It's different.
Oh, it is different. And you have to, it's something you have to get used to. My son
hmm
lives there, and it took him all last summer to get used to it. And this year, when I talk to him about the weather, it's always like, hey, mom, it's just weather. So,
Yeah, Shakespeare. The humidity in Texas is different from that in South Carolina. I feel like Texas is it's brutal, man. It's
yeah.
brutal. hmm
So, tell me a little bit about, let's start, basically from your childhood and move up. Um, many of us, as we're growing up, we have a vision of who we think we want to be, where we want to go.
hmm
And I will tell you that the vision that I had at 9 or 10, or even in my teens, is nothing like the life I'm living today. But one
mm
of the things I think many of us who go through our journey, we will say that we had to be in those places in
hmm
order to be where we are today. So
hmm
let's talk about it in that sense.
Okay. Well, yeah, my childhood informed a lot of who I became later. Uh, like through abuse, I think I it feels like you're when you experience that much abuse, it feels like your nervous system is always on fire.
Yep.
And I contend with being hyper vigilant all the time, and which actually has done a great deal to help in like informing my work as a writer. So I'm able to, because of the way my dad was very abusive, I was able to like study people in a way that is now relevant to me in my work. So like I can generally I can spend time with a person, spend 5 minutes with them, and kind of understand their entire outlook on life. And I'm able to read people very well because as a kid that was really it was imperative that I knew how my father was feeling at any given moment. And he was rather capricious and violent. Um, and So I remember when I was 6 years old, my dad had just got done beating me for something, and I remember I was crying, I was sobbing out in the front yard, and I told myself that I would never treat my children like that. And I was 6, and I don't think that that kind of revelation is appropriate for a 6-year-old to have, Um, and so, but that moment was was really profound for me. Uh, and I knew then that I was more observant uh, than generally my peers were.
And no one, no matter if they're a child or an adult, should go through abuse. And
Hmm.
so, and I know that, probably keeps you hyper vigilant around people, that you're
Hmm.
going to be careful. Um, and you shouldn't have to live that way. But to our
Hmm.
listeners, sometimes that's the way things happen, and we have to take those things from our past and make them work for us in the future. So
Hmm.
you got through your childhood in some manner. You got yourself away from the abuse, but did you
Hmm.
carry the abuse inside of you when you got away from your dad?
I think that I read something yesterday. Actually, it said that you're always going to seek their approval because then it will sort of validate everything that you went through as a kid. And so, of course, I contend with that. Um, and I deal with like borderline personality disorder as a consequence. And so, yeah, I experience everything emotionally so much more intensely, and also because because I have Tourette's. That is another failure physiologically in my brain that doesn't have a check there for emotional regulation. So emotionally dysregulated in more than one way, uh, and which makes everything feel so much more intensely.
Right.
Hmm.
And for those of you who don't understand Tourette's, for many years, uh,
Hmm.
if we saw someone who had Tourette's and maybe was using foul language or movements that just don't coordinate with what we think is normal,
Hmm.
um, we isolated those individuals. And the reality of it is, as you can see with Kristof, he's a writer, he's a photographer, he's been out in the world, he can do it. But like all of us, we all have something that makes us a little different, that can
Hmm.
cause us some challenges in life.
Hmm.
If we can be understanding, I think
Yeah.
that is the most important thing. So, what took you into writing and photography? Because that is an art that um, really, it's very individualized.
Yeah, Shakespeare. Yeah, no, you are definitely very reliant on your own capacity in both of those. It's a very lonely uh craft, especially writing. So I became a writer. My the first time I ever discovered that I could do it in the first place was when I was like 13, and I had to. We were in a math class in junior high, and we were writing letters to soldiers in Iraq, and I remember experiencing this really uh, profound uh, feeling where I understood and I felt this kind of music like wake up inside of me, and I started to write, and I just remember feeling like I could do it, and it just made sense to me. Anyway, I turned in the letter just like everybody else did, and then I left class. I didn't think about it until lunchtime when a bunch of kids like swarmed me and said that the teacher had been reading my letter to every class because she thought it was so beautiful, and she wanted to publish it in the newspaper, and she was shocked. I think she was just happy that I was good at something.
Right.
'Cause I was I was a troubled kid for obvious reasons. I was a
Sure.
troubled kid, and I didn't do well academically after a certain point. I did very well for a long time, but then, like, as things become more complex and, I started to struggle. And she was quite surprised. And then I started writing in the Navy again. That's when I started to take it. Uh, I got a laptop and I started to do the work, and I was experimenting with words, and uh, I did that until about 27. I was a journalist from 26 to 27, and I only did it for about a year, and I still won awards for feature writing and for photography. Here's the thing, though. I'm not a photographer, really. I'm not. I am because I've won awards for it, right? But I don't. Uh, I don't do it on my own independently. So like I did it for the newspaper, and I knew how to do it, but just instinctually, I guess. It's an intuitive craft, I guess. But uh, yeah, I didn't. I don't do it on my own because I don't have a camera or anything.
So, I
Mm,
love how you say you're not a photographer, but you have the intuitiveness when you have a camera in front of
mhm,
you to be able to eye your subject, whatever it is,
mhm,
to create a vision that is important to others. And,
mhm,
you know, when we talk about photography, it's interesting. When I first met my husband, um, he was into photography, had been since he was about 14 years old.
mhm,
And I went to he was doing a camera show somewhere, and he asked me if I would come and help him. And I came out to help him, and all of a sudden it was like I wanted to pick up a camera
mhm,
and start photographing.
mhm,
And we started a business later in our marriage, and he is very good with nature, but
mhm.
I'm much better defining it in a person's face. Now, I
And
don't
yeah.
call myself a photographer, but
Mhm,
if I have a camera in my hands, that's
mhm,
something I can do. So, you know,
mhm.
it,
Isn't
it's
that funny?
it's incredible.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah, it is.
It's Shakespeare. It is a kind of imitation too, I think. In the same way that some people can sing, but they can't like they can imitate really. It's more
Right.
imitation than it is like singing. I can also imitate people in that sense, but that's what I felt like I that's what I feel like I'm doing when I'm being working as a photographer. That I'm just imitating sort of what I've seen as successful and as well crafted and well executed. Uh, and I don't really, yeah, but it sounds like your husband, that he has his own sort of maybe thing going on. That's
Yes, he
yeah.
does. But
Mm,
one of the things that I'm learning from you in this short conversation so far is your previous journey that were on has not allowed you to maybe embrace those things that you do well. You know you do photography well, but you don't pick up a camera just to do it. But you have those abilities. And
mhm,
sometimes we have to start acknowledging those things to not to be too proud of ourselves, but to
mhm.
admit that, hey, I am okay. These are the
Yeah,
things I do well. And
yeah.
obviously, you found that in your writing as well, correct?
Mhm.
And that's something that you
Oh,
want
yeah.
to do.
I have a I have a healthy amount of conceit when it comes to my work as a writer. I Shakespeare. I and that's simply because I haven't had a a thoughtful repudiation. It hasn't been thoughtfully undermined by anybody. I've had nothing but support since I started writing. Even the New Yorker actually. They I was 22 years old and I tried to publish a short story with them because I have no shame. And I I sent them a short story that I had written, and they actually gave me a personalized rejection letter. And anyone that's a writer knows how rare that is for an editor to bother to write back and say, "We this is what we thought of your work," actually, instead of just giving you a form letter. They didn't give me just a form letter, and I was 22 when I wrote that. And so I've known for a long time that maybe I could do this well, and if I tried hard enough. And so I work very hard at it. Shakespeare.
So tell me if I'm wrong, because it sounds like you look at your challenges as this is an opportunity for me to do something better.
Mhm,
And that's what it sounds like you took from the abuse you got with your dad, that you knew that when you went to write this letter, you could do something better, reaching out to, one of our servicemen over in
mhm,
Afghanistan.
mhm.
So, how do you do that on a daily basis? What is it that propels you to do something better each day?
I think it's like anything, it's a confluence of factors. It's like, number one, like I think we're seeking redemption. And you know, and another thing is that uh, I truly, like John Steinbeck said, he said his whole mission as a writer is to help people understand one another, and I share in that also, which is really, for me, is my modus operandi. It's the most important thing to me, is to help people understand one another. And also, I think the third thing, which is, I think is a crucial element, is that I don't want to have gone through all of this suffering for nothing. As a white guy, I have fewer challenges than women and people of color, far fewer challenges, and I can prove this in more than one way, but in a really important way. I've gone viral on the internet a couple of times, on TikTok, for on that platform, and I've received nothing but support. Nothing but support. I mean, I might have received maybe one or two comments from anybody that was kind of was rude or demeaning. While every woman that I've spoken to that's ever gone viral has said, like, it was a nightmare. Like, if they're not already famous, and they, for a reason that's positive, they go viral for, even in a good way, it's a nightmare. Because they get all these comments that are really just awful. And that's just one way, and that's just one way. Um, so I, but still, like, I have Shakespeare, because I have Tourette's, and I've injured myself so much, and emotionally, in despair, and deal with a lot of mental health problems. I want to have I want to make something of this.
Absolutely.
Mm.
So you just touched on a subject that so many people don't want to talk about, and it's
Mhm.
called mental health. And we all have mental health of some sort. I mean,
Mhm.
we can't get
Mhm.
away from it. Okay.
Yeah.
But what is it that you do for the community to make people understand that it's okay to go get help? It's okay to seek, answers, that we don't need to hide behind it. I know
Mhm.
growing up, my father had a cousin who, um, sometimes we would see him, he was, as he would say, okay. And there were other times that,
Mm.
we were just told, well, he needs his rest. And it would be like, why does a grown man need his rest?
Mhm.
And it wasn't until probably maybe about 10, 15 years ago that I was having a conversation with my mother, and
Mhm.
we were talking about this one cousin. And I said, why did we have to hide him at times? And she said, because that's what society did. Well,
Yeah.
we don't need to do that anymore. So,
Mhm.
what can you offer to others to come out and get the assistance they need?
Well, uh, I think that it requires that a lot of people, like, for example, for myself, I have a video that I put up on TikTok like 5 or 6 days ago that went sort of viral. It has 120,000 views or something like that, where I said I might be hospitalized because of, at the time, I had been going without my a certain medication of mine for 5 days or something, and it was really, really destructive to my mental health. And so I had to go to the hospital because I still hadn't received my medications in the mail, from the VA, uh, and I had experiencing, suicidal ideation. So, uh, they brought me into a room, and they talked to me for a minute, and they gave me my medications, and then, but then ultimately they decided that was, my chief complaint was driven almost entirely by the fact that I didn't have my medication. So they said, "You can go home. You're not gonna be hospitalized." Like, so, um, but the video itself, so many of the comments were people saying, "Thank you for actually saying this," because so many people, it's stigmatized.
Right.
And so I think that, uh, not that I have any courage. I think I'm just like shameless, really, more so than courageous. But I also wanted to tell people because a lot of people follow my work, and I wanted them to know that I might be gone for a while. Because so they know, so many of them know I struggle with mental health, and they would be concerned.
And, I give you kudos for that because my youngest son is on the autism spectrum. And when he was growing up, he was on so many different medications
Mhm.
because that's how they treated it back then. And certain medications made him very angry. Some made him,
Mhm.
um, uh, I guess I would just say paranoid. Okay.
Yeah.
And as a mother with him, I understood what he was going through. And I was his and his dad, we were his support system. But when he
Mhm.
went to school and he was having these issues, he was looked at as being
Yeah. They're
odd,
less sympathetic.
disruptive. Exactly.
Yeah.
Um, Luckily for
Catch
him,
22.
as he got older and truly matured and he could identify which medications really were not for him, he then
Mhm.
could sit down with his doctors and say, hey,
Yeah. It's a
put me on.
collaborative process.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And he's doing exceptionally well. However, I will say about 2 months ago, I noticed talking to him on the phone that he was getting angrier every day about something. And I just finally said to him, when was the last time you took your medication? And his
Mhm.
comment to me was, the insurance didn't approve it. And I just like, my hands and my body, stiffened up. And I said, you got to call your doctor. We got to figure something else out. And he listened. He was put on something else, which is much better for him.
Mm.
But he now is more reflective on, I don't want to be like I was those
Mhm.
weeks. And
Yeah.
and that's probably what you were noticing too. Your medication
Mhm.
didn't show up and it's throwing you off. So there's no shame for number one, taking medication.
Mhm.
And there's typically no shame if you're going to come out and let people know, hey, I'm in need right now.
Mhm. It was very encouraging, you know? I think, um, I was surprised, and I was thinking about this, uh, the dynamic that I had been experiencing, and here's when I lived in Canada, I had healthcare there because I was a permanent resident, so I could go to the hospital whenever I needed to, and I think that, the fact that there's access and that people take advantage of it, eventually the stigma erodes. And so the more incidences that you have of people that are normally resistant to mental health, like to reforming their mental health or in some way correcting, like helping to strengthen it, uh, you sort of undermine that stigma over and over again. And that's why in Canada, I feel like there are a lot of the men there. I'm gonna just say men because men
Sure.
are I think the problems, the mainstays of like this whole issue of like not seeking mental health resources and stuff like that. Because that's just been my experience. That men take care of things on their own, especially from the South. So, but in Canada, it's a little different. The guys are a lot more accepting. Uh, and in America, I think that if men had more access to mental health resources that didn't cost them anything. See, it's the cost I think that says you're an idiot. You paid that kind of money for your brain so
Yeah.
you could feel a little bit better. Like, why don't you just man up? It's so like it's the fact that it costs something. I think that's really it's curious, but I think that's it. It's the crux of it. Is that once it's free and accessible to everyone, it's going to feel a lot less silly for a lot of men to go, okay, I'm going to go
Well,
for
and
help.
and sadly, we still have a lot of men who have been brought up in an environment where as you said, man up. Okay. And I
Mhm.
remember when my youngest was very small, even before he got diagnosed with autism, he, I remember him crying about something. And my husband, who is the gentlest soul in the whole world, for some reason said to him, be a man. And I just like grabbed my husband and I said, he's like 4 years old. No, tell him to be a child. And my husband didn't even realize why he had said it, but I
Mhm.
realized he said it because that was the upbringing he had. So when he cried,
Mhm.
his father wanted him to man up. And
Mhm.
ever since that day, my husband has never used that kind of terminology again. And if it starts to come
Mhm.
out of his mouth, I'll say to him, really? And he'll go, yeah, I'm sorry. We've got to get out of that mentality. And there's still a lot of it going on. And, just because you're a man doesn't mean that you have to have more strength than a woman or more strength than somebody else. We are all
Mhm.
individuals, and you're proving that. So you did this viral uh, TikTok and it
Mhm.
worked for you. So
Mhm.
what do you do going forward? Did you put out another TikTok to let people know that, hey, I
Mhm.
got medication and I'm okay and,
Yeah.
good.
I made 2 more after that. I made one to say uh, that I wasn't hospitalized and that they gave me medication and that, you know, for so many reasons, I feel undeserving of love and support. Uh, but, uh, uh, yeah, and that's like has like 20,000 views. A lot of people are very, lovely and generous with the way they supported me. And, then another to say a few days later to say, like, I was feeling much better. You don't realize how distorted, like, how distorted your understanding of the world is when you're going through this. You don't realize that, like, you might think, "I'm being totally rational," but you're not. You don't even realize it. You can't. And so for me, I knew it because I've gone through this before. So I told, but luckily I have access to the VA. Unlike your son who had the misfortune of like having to like sit there and figure out like another way. I can get any medication I need the same day. I go to the hospital. I don't pay anything to do get Shakespeare to get all my stuff. Um, but so many people, go through the what your son went through, and you don't even realize that you actually do need help. If you start to think like you're not worthy, uh, that's when you need to go. You need to
Exactly.
go, and
So
it needs to
you
be
brought
addressed.
you brought up a subject that I wasn't even expecting, but I think it's really important because you are speaking of the VA in a very, very positive manner. That if
Hmm.
you need something as a veteran, you can go to the VA. And
Hmm.
yet there are so many veterans out there who need the help and they're saying they can't get it. Is it because they're just not going to the VA? Is it that they're
Mm.
too proud or think that, I don't know
I
what they're thinking.
I do not. It's really curious. I honestly do not know. Because Shakespeare. For me, I was disabled because of the military. Shakespeare, because of the military, and so the way that they measure your need is based on that.
Okay.
And so, like, if you're a certain percentage and above, like I'm 70%. So right now, so 70% and above, you get all of your healthcare paid for, like it, everything that's service connected as far but the thing is for me it's been everything. So for a lot of veterans, if they apply for disability for the disability pension from the military and they don't achieve a certain threshold or something, if they don't reach that, then they won't get the same amount of support. um I think that needs to be corrected. Obviously, I think that just all veterans should just get the healthcare
Absolutely.
that
Right.
they need. Because you never know, like especially the more and more we learn. Like for example, you can't even yell. Apparently, you can't even yell anymore in boot camp. Like you can't, as a drill sergeant, you can't yell at the recruits anymore. When I was in the Navy, the kind of stuff that I heard drill sergeants, I call them drill sergeants, but they're called
Yep.
RDCs. What I heard them say to some of the people would in these days would get you fired without before you could even blink. Like at any job, it doesn't matter. If you said the kind of stuff that I've heard people say, the RDCs say to it would it, there's I have no doubt in my mind. It was disgusting and it was horrifying. I mean, they like describing people as cancers. Like you're a freaking cancer. And talking about their body parts like in a really disparaging way, and calling them fat, and saying, just really disgusting things. It was honestly horrific. And you can't do that anymore. Thank goodness, right? So I
Right.
have to wonder, like, if you went through that, like, is it how can that not provoke some kind of trauma? Um, because it did, even for me. I was there, and it did. They wouldn't say that stuff to me. They didn't say that stuff to me, but they said it to other people, and I'm still like,
Yep.
they think that they need to toughen you up to go to war, but the war is going to do that on its own. You
Exactly.
know, you need to
Exactly.
know that you're going to be supported by the people that are with you back home, and that are with you out in wherever you're stationed. You need to know that they're going to have your back, not that they're going to be the enemy before you get to the enemy.
Exactly. Well, and as I'm hearing that, many of us have grown up like you did, um, in abusive homes that were abusive with words. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that is based on culture or
Mm-hmm.
people just that they brought what they learned into their home. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember I had what I thought was a friend in school, um, was constantly telling me, no matter what my size was, I was fat. And when I met my first husband, my mother-in-law, from day one, I was fat.
Mm-hmm.
Why wasn't I on a diet, et cetera, et cetera. And so I would look in the mirror and I was never thin enough. Now, I didn't become anorexic or anything like that. I still maintained who I was on the outside, but on the inside, I have to tell you, there are still days that every once in a while I'll look in the mirror and I'll hear that kid from school and I'll hear my ex mother in law. And I can't imagine being berated in front of other people by a drill
Mm-hmm.
sergeant, what
Mm-hmm.
that does to somebody.
Yeah, and especially with this stuff. But the thing is, that sounds like body dysmorphia, and what you're describing is a completely normal reaction. And I don't even. It's not a health. It is an understandable reaction to that kind of abuse. Even the first time my ex-wife met my stepmother, who is the devil, um, she she said she got out of the car, and the first thing she said to me was, "Wow, you got fat." And she hadn't seen me in years. And that was the first thing she said to me in front of my ex-wife for the first time she had ever heard her voice. Um, it was, I tell you what, that still messes with me. And I deal with body dysmorphia. I can't imagine, like, especially with the way the women's beauty standards are, like being a woman and dealing with those kinds of comments would be devastating. I mean, would be devastating.
And I think there are more men today who are dealing with it as well.
Yeah, I have it.
And
Mm,
it's something that I think we all need to we need to challenge ourselves to, check our words at the door before we use them.
mhm,
Um, Start to be aware of what other people are going through. Um,
mhm.
you know, I don't have to
60,
know,
60.
Christoph's full story to be able to have a conversation with him and accept him for who he is. But
Yeah.
just knowing a little bit, then you can say, okay, you know, hey, that's his challenge. I guarantee you, as he's watching me, he sees my challenges as well. We all have them. So
Mhm.
before we end this today, I know you have a book out there,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Tell us about your book.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, it's an epic fantasy. Uh, and if you've ever read, if you're a big fan of Charles Dickens and you're a big fan of Tolkien, it's like if Tolkien and Dickens came together and wrote an epic fantasy. Uh, uh it's about climate change. It's about there's pirates, there's giants, there's paradise in it. There's empire, slavery, everything. I mean, it's really comprehensive, I think, in a lot of ways. Uh, but it's ultimately about this climate change threat that is occurring because of something that you don't know what it is until later on. Um, and so far I've got 2 books, and I'm working on the 3rd book. This is the 2nd book right now.
The second
It's
son. Okay.
Yeah, the 2nd son. I forget the name, say the name all the time. People it drives people crazy, especially my friends. They're like, "You need to advertise correctly." I don't I don't remember. I love my work so much. Like, I made a video last night. I found out an Australian read like 114 pages of my first book in one day. And I made a whole video about how excited that it is. I love it. I love it. Just to be able to share my work with people. But it's a huge for me. It's about the adventure. I'm a huge fan of writing compelling adventure with characters that are there's a lot of incredible women that are in their 60s that are like leaders, and they're badass, if I can say that. They're really awesome, you know. And yeah, it's for me, it's incredible to be able to do this work. Uh, and I love it. I love it.
We're going to make sure all that information is in the show notes. I encourage my listeners, if nothing else, um, find it, find kindness in your heart when you are meeting new people and getting to know people.
Hmm.
I love doing this podcast because I learned so much from my guests. And today, Kristof, I learned a lot from you. I only wish you a lot of happiness.
Mm.
And I'm assuming from the comment you made, your ex-wife, do you have children?
No.
No. So one of these days, if you do become that dad, I know that
Hmm.
you are going to bring your children up in a much safer, humble home. And I truly appreciate you. And when you finish that next book, let us know and we'll have you back on and we can talk about it.
Thank you, Karen. You're very
Thank,
kind.
well, thank you. You've been wonderful.
Thank you.
You take care. Bye bye now.
You